Solomon Ware was 40 years old on the morning of his 10th wedding anniversary when he came downstairs to find the house empty in a way that went beyond the ordinary quiet of an early hour. Her coffee cup was not on the counter. Her keys were not on the hook. The overnight bag she kept in the closet for work trips was gone, and in its place on the kitchen table was a sealed envelope with his name on it in handwriting that was composed and deliberate. The handwriting of someone who had been rehearsing this moment for a considerable time and had decided that this particular Tuesday in September was when it would happen. He stood at the table and read the letter without sitting down. It said what such letters say. It said she had not been happy for a long time. It said she had found clarity. It said she hoped he would understand. It did not mention the man she had been meeting at the Marriott on Peachtree every third Thursday for the better part of 16 months. It did not mention the $47,000 she had moved out of their joint savings over that same period in transfers careful enough to avoid triggering any alert he might notice. What the letter also did not mention, because she had no idea it existed, was the envelope he had left for her on the bedroom nightstand before he came downstairs. A small cream-colored envelope with her name on it, in his handwriting, containing a single folded document. She had not opened it. She had simply gone. She had no idea what she had walked away from. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from, and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The September light came through the back windows of the house in Atlanta's West End neighborhood with the particular quality it took on in early fall. Still warm, but beginning to angle lower, casting long shadows across the concrete floor of the workshop Solomon had built in the converted garage 3 years prior. He was at his workbench when the anniversary arrived, the way he was at the workbench most mornings before the day officially began, methodical and unhurried, sanding a segment of black walnut that would eventually become the front panel of a cabinet he was building for the library off the main hallway. He was a furniture maker by visible trade. That was the profession he described at neighborhood dinners, and the one his wife introduced him with at her firm's events, always with a brightness in her voice that served more as framing than enthusiasm. The brightness of a woman constructing a narrative for an audience. He built custom pieces. He worked from a workshop. He drove a pickup truck with sawdust on the seats and a rack for lumber in the bed. To everyone who saw him, he was a craftsman operating at the level of comfortable, modest success, and he had arranged things to appear exactly that way, for reasons that had nothing to do with deception, and everything to do with the particular discipline of a man who had learned early that the loudest thing in a room was rarely the most important. His grandfather, Ezra Ware, had been a woodworker in Birmingham for 50 years, and he had passed to Solomon both the craft and the philosophy that governed it. Ezra had told him once, when Solomon was 16 and had asked why he never advertised his work or sought coverage in the design press, "Son, the wood doesn't care who's watching. It only cares what you do to it." He had died at 81, the year Solomon graduated from Georgia Tech with a degree in industrial design. And not a day of significant work had passed since, without that voice somewhere in the room. He had met Diane Ashford at an art exhibition in Inman Park 7 years into his professional life, when he was 32 and she was 29 and working as a senior associate at a real estate development firm that was reshaping sections of the city with the ambition of people who believed growth and scale were interchangeable with vision. She was sharp and socially fluent, and she moved through rooms the way certain people do, not drawing attention so much as organizing it around herself. He had been there at the opening because one of his cabinets was installed in the gallery's rear study, a fact noted on a small placard that she had apparently read before she found him, because her first question was not, "What do you do?" but "How do you decide what a piece wants to be?" He had liked that question. He had liked the implication behind it, that objects had a direction of their own, and the maker's job was to find it rather than impose it. He had found her admirable for a long time. She was at the kitchen counter when he came in from the workshop that evening 3 weeks before their anniversary, on her phone with her back to him in a way that had become so routine over the prior year that he had stopped registering it as notable and had started registering it as data. The new bracelet on her wrist was not one he had given her. The ease with which she ended the call when she heard his footsteps, not startling, not fumbling, but simply ending it with a practiced smoothness, was the ease of someone who had been doing this long enough to have developed a technique. He poured coffee. He asked about her day. She answered at the right length and with the right details, and nothing she said was untrue in any verifiable way. In his jacket's inner pocket, his secondary phone, registered to the holding company, known only to his attorney, his accountant, and the 3 business partners who had built the portfolio alongside him over 15 years, sat where it always sat, undisturbed. She had never asked about that phone. She had never opened that jacket. Some things you don't say. Some things you simply leave where they are and wait. He came home early from a site visit the following Thursday and found her car in the driveway at 2 in the afternoon on a day she had told him she would be in Buckhead until 6. He parked on the street out of a habit he could not fully explain, only that something in the rhythm of the moment told him to. He went around to the side entrance of the house and let himself in through the workshop door. He heard the voice before he reached the kitchen. A man's voice, low and easy, carrying the particular register of someone comfortable in a space he had been in before. Solomon did not enter the kitchen. He stood in the hallway and listened with the stillness of a man who understood that information gathered calmly was always more useful than information extracted through confrontation. He heard enough. The man's name, which he already knew in outline, but now heard confirmed in conversation, was Carter Lay, a partner at Diane's firm, a man who drove a particular car and wore his status in the visible way of someone who believed status was the point of the exercise. He had been at this for 16 months, by what Solomon could piece together, possibly longer. Solomon went back through the workshop door. He sat in his truck on the side street for 20 minutes. His face was perfectly calm. Then he drove to his accountant's office and asked for a complete summary of the joint account activity for the prior 24 months. What the summary showed, presented to him 3 days later in a manila folder on a conference table by a woman who did not flinch when she handed it across, was methodical and patient. 41 transfers from the joint savings account, ranging from $800 to $2,400, always on weekdays, always structured to fall beneath the threshold of any automated notice he had configured. Total amount extracted across 16 months, $47,000. The destination account, which his attorney identified within a week through proper legal channels, was a personal savings account held in Diane's name alone at a credit union he had not known she used. He sat with the summary for a long time. He did not allow himself the indulgence of anger, because anger was expensive, and he had never been able to afford expensive things with his attention. He had built the furniture business in the early years on the discipline of not reacting to what the wood did before he understood why it was doing it. Grain direction, moisture content, the hidden tensions in a board that looked straight until you put it under pressure. You didn't respond until you knew the full picture. You documented. You planned. You worked. He opened a new folder on his laptop and named it simply September. Then he picked up the secondary phone and called the one person who knew the full shape of what he had spent 15 years building. And he told her it was time to begin. He met with Felicia Grayson on a Monday morning in her offices in Midtown Atlanta. She was 57 years old, a corporate and estate attorney who had represented Solomon's personal interests since he was 26. And she had the economy of language that came from someone who had spent 3 decades watching people arrive at her office in various states of crisis and had learned that precision was the most useful gift she could offer any of them. She listened to everything. She did not interrupt. When he finished, she opened the file she had prepared in advance, because he had called ahead with sufficient detail for her to begin, and she laid it on the desk and turned it toward him. It was the full asset summary. 15 years of patient construction, built through an industrial design holding company that Solomon had incorporated the year he turned 25. 3 years before the furniture workshop. 7 years before he met Diane Ashford. The holding company had interests in 3 furniture and material goods manufacturing operations, 2 design licensing portfolios that had been generating royalty income for 11 years, and a real estate arm that had been acquiring and converting mixed-use commercial properties in Atlanta and Savannah with a methodical patience that had compounded across the full span into something his accountant now certified at a current valuation of just over $50 million. Diane had known about the workshop. She had known about the custom furniture business. She had not known, had never asked, had never looked behind the modest presentation he maintained in his visible life about any of the rest. The marriage predates the most significant asset growth, Felicia said, tapping page 3, but the prenuptial agreement covers the holding company and its derivatives in full. That was standard language we put in at the beginning. She looked at him over her reading glasses. She has not filed. Her attorney, assuming she retained one, has not made contact with my office. She may not have retained one yet, Solomon said. She only left this morning. Felicia nodded. Then we file first. She paused. There is one other matter. The gift. Solomon reached into his jacket and placed a small cream-colored envelope on the desk. Felicia picked it up and removed the single-folded document inside and read it without expression. It was a 1-page summary of the holding company's structure and current valuation, with Solomon's signature at the bottom and a date of the prior Sunday, the day before their anniversary. You prepared this for her, Felicia said. I had hoped she would still be there to open it, he said. I wanted her to know what she was choosing to leave. I wanted her to have the information first, while there was still a choice to be made. He was quiet for a moment. She chose before she saw it. Felicia set the envelope down and looked at him with the composed attention of someone who had stopped being surprised by human behavior many years ago. She walked out of a $50 million marriage on her anniversary morning without opening the envelope on the nightstand. He nodded. Felicia picked up her pen. Then, we give her a different kind of education. Bitterness required ongoing emotional investment in people who no longer deserved it. He was not going to make that investment. 2 days after the meeting with Felicia, Solomon drove to Birmingham on a Saturday morning. He brought his grandmother's preferred shortbread from a bakery in Decatur. Ezra's wife, Miriam, was 91 and still lived in the house on Center Street, where Solomon had spent every summer until he was 18. She was small and deliberate, and her memory was precise in the way that some elderly people's memories are precise, holding certain things with a clarity that younger minds let blur. She listened to the account of Diane's departure, and the letter, and the hotel, and the $47,000, without changing her expression. She had never entirely trusted Diane Ashford, and she had communicated this to Solomon over the years through the particular economy of small comments delivered with the timing of a woman who understood that the right words said at the right moment did more work than a full speech. The envelope, she said, when he finished. You left it. She didn't open it. Miriam was quiet for a long time. She looked at the window. Your grandfather used to say that a person reveals themselves most completely in the moment they think they're the one leaving. She turned back to him. He meant it about wood, about how a piece shows you its true grain when you take a blade to it. But it applies. She folded her hands. She showed you who she was. That's not a loss. That's information. He drove back to Atlanta on Sunday, with the windows down, and the city coming in from the north, and the weight of the prior week reorganizing itself in his chest into something that was not quite grief and not quite relief, but was somewhere in the territory of clarity. The particular clarity that arrives when the thing you have been uncertain about becomes, finally, certain. By the following Friday, Felicia had filed the formal dissolution petition with full asset disclosure. She had also, through a forensic accountant she engaged on Monday morning, prepared a complete accounting of the $47,000 in extracted joint funds, documented, dated, and attached as an exhibit to the filing. The filing was served to Diane on Thursday afternoon at her office. Carter Lee had been present in the building at the time, by his own arrangement. His presence there on a Thursday afternoon, documented by the process server, would later prove a relevant detail when the firm's managing partners had questions of their own. Real power operated in quiet rooms. The reckoning did not happen in a courtroom or a mediation suite. It happened in Felicia Grayson's conference room on a Wednesday morning in October, 3 weeks after the filing, arranged at the request of Diane's attorney, a man named Holbrook, who had taken the case with the confidence of someone who had not yet reviewed the full asset disclosure and had therefore not yet understood the precise dimensions of the situation his client had created. Holbrook had reviewed it by Wednesday morning. The confidence had been replaced by something more measured. Diane arrived with Holbrook and seated herself across the conference table from Solomon, with the composure of a woman who was still performing certainty she no longer fully felt. She had, he could see, spent the weeks since the filing constructing a new version of events in which the marriage's failure was his fault in ways she was prepared to enumerate. This was the natural human tendency, and he did not fault her for it. Felicia opened her portfolio and placed the first document on the table. It was the prenuptial agreement, with the relevant sections flagged in yellow: the holding company, its derivatives, its premarital status, and the explicit language governing the treatment of those assets in any dissolution proceeding. Diane looked at it. Her composure held. The second document was the asset summary, $50 million of holding company valuation, the manufacturing interests, the licensing royalties, the real estate portfolio. All of it laid out in the measured language of a certified accountant who had spent 3 days ensuring every number was defensible and every figure was sourced. Diane's composure did not hold past page 2. She looked up from the document and looked at Solomon for the first time since she sat down, and in her expression was the precise recognition of a woman understanding, in real time, the complete shape of what she had walked away from on a Tuesday morning in September, without opening an envelope. "This is not possible," she said, quietly, not to him. To no one in particular. The third document was the accounting of the joint savings account. 41 transfers, $47,000, 16 months destination account confirmed. Holbrook placed a hand briefly on Diane's arm, a professional signal to stop speaking. Felicia placed the fourth document, the small cream-colored envelope, photocopied, with a 1-page summary inside. "My client prepared this document on the Sunday evening before your departure," she said, with the same unhurried clarity she brought to everything. "It was on the nightstand. It was not opened. He wanted you to have the information before you made your decision. You made your decision without it." Diane looked at the photocopy of the envelope, her name in Solomon's handwriting. She looked at it for a long time. Solomon watched her with the same quiet attention he brought to a difficult piece of wood. The attention that was not judgment, not satisfaction, but simply the act of seeing clearly what was actually there. "The prenuptial agreement holds," Felicia continued. "The joint savings recovery will be addressed as part of the dissolution terms. You are welcome to contest either position, and we will welcome the process, but I want to be direct with you about what that process will look like and how long it will take and what it will cost." She let the pause do its work. "Or we can settle the terms today on the basis of what is in front of you, and both parties can move forward." Holbrook asked for a recess. They took 20 minutes in the hallway. When Diane came back to the table, something in her posture had changed. Not broken, but recalibrated in the way of a person who has accepted the actual terrain of a situation and is now navigating it rather than arguing about whether it exists. The settlement was agreed upon that afternoon. Diane received what the prenuptial agreement specified she was entitled to: her own assets, her own income, a fair division of the joint savings remainder after the recovered $47,000 was credited back. It was not nothing. It was also not $50 million. Solomon signed the settlement documents with the same even hand he used to sign anything. He stood. He gathered his jacket. He looked at Diane one final time. She was looking at the table, and he understood that she was in the middle of a very long reckoning with herself that had nothing to do with him and had probably been a long time coming. "I left the envelope there because I wanted you to know," he said. "Not as leverage, just as information. You deserve to know what you were choosing." He paused. "I hope you find what you're looking for." He walked out of the conference room and through the lobby and into the October afternoon, and the air had the first real chill of the season in it, and he stood on the sidewalk for a moment and let it settle around him. He was done. 11 months had passed like a long exhale by the time Solomon sat at the workbench in his new workshop in a house he had purchased in Decatur, a 1950s ranch that he had been renovating in the evenings, methodically, board by board and room by room, the way he did everything that mattered. The workshop was at the back, larger than the one in West End, with north-facing skylights he had specified himself, because north light was the most honest light for seeing the true color of a wood's grain. He was working on a dining table, black walnut again, a long slab he had been allowing to acclimate to the workshop's humidity for 3 months before he touched it. His grandfather had taught him that you let the wood settle into its new environment before you made any demands of it. You did not rush the process just because you were ready. The wood had its own schedule. The holding company had, in the months since the dissolution, completed the acquisition of a 4th manufacturing operation, a small precision woodworking facility in Savannah that Solomon had been watching for 2 years, waiting for the right conditions. The deal had closed in the spring. His business manager described the portfolio as being in the strongest position it had occupied in its history, a description Solomon received with the equanimity of a man who measured health not by peaks but by the quality of the foundation. He had met Camille at a design symposium in Savannah the previous spring, 3 weeks after the acquisition closed. She was a materials scientist who consulted for architects and furniture makers on sustainable sourcing, a woman who spoke about wood the way people who genuinely understood things spoke about them, which was to say with specificity and without performance. She was here now, in the kitchen of the Decatur house, making something that smelled like garlic and good intent. And she had asked him once about the workshop, and he had taken her through it piece by piece, and she had asked the right questions, the kind that showed she was listening to the answers, and that had been, in its quiet way, everything. Diane Ashford was managing a mid-level project portfolio at a development firm in Marietta, A lateral move from where she had been, made necessary by the particular awkwardness that had followed Carter Lee's departure from their shared firm 3 months after the settlement. A departure that had to do with matters that had been accumulating long before Solomon's divorce proceedings surfaced them. Carter had relocated to another city. Diane's former network of professional contacts in Atlanta, built over a decade, had contracted in the way that professional networks contracted when the story people told about a person changed. Solomon had heard these things through the ordinary passage of news in a city that talked. He registered them the way he registered the weather, as conditions in the environment, present but not controlling. He did not think about Diane with satisfaction or with pain. He thought about her the way he thought about a piece of wood that had shown him its limitations before he invested too much work in it. You noted it. You learned from it. You moved on to the next piece. The walnut slab on his bench was clear and straight, and the grain ran true from one end to the other. He ran his hand along it in the low evening light coming through the skylights, and felt the particular satisfaction of a man who had learned to recognize a good piece of material when he encountered one. Freedom was the real currency. He had been rich for a long time. He just hadn't had anyone worth spending it with. He had that now. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.